What's up, everybody? I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. It has been a hot minute since we have done a live stream. So better late than never. Sorry for being fashionably late tonight as well. We've got a great show in store for you. We're going to talk about some general topics to start off with, some things that are breaking today around the NFL, even some non-Seahawk topics. And then I want to get into the Seahawks ticket policy that they unveiled yesterday and get some of your thoughts on that as well. We're also going to get some thoughts from Bryce Coutts of the HawkZone Rundown podcast. Haven't talked to him since the draft, so we'll catch up on some of that stuff. And then we're going to go over the roster. Not all 90 players on the roster, but we'll give you a look at what the depth chart kind of looks like today. Talk about what we feel like are the strengths of the roster, maybe some weaknesses, maybe some work that still is yet to be done. And then we'll get your thoughts on all of it as well. That's coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
All right, welcome in Bryce Coutts, co-host of the HawkZone Rundown podcast, along with Ryan McMillan. Also, you can see that they're affiliated with Field Goals as well. Are you fully recovered from the draft yet?
Yes and no, because the problem for me is I've kind of come down off that draft high, and now I'm like, okay, when's preseason starting? Like, when's training camp? Like, I want this to start going now. So, I've kind of come down off the draft high, but then I just remember all the great players that we took, and I'm super excited to see this team on the field.
What was your favorite part of the draft class?
That's a really tough question, Dan, because like in past years, we've been really able to say that. We've been able to say, hey, like I really liked the first two picks, or I've liked the last couple picks in the later rounds. This is probably one of the very few classes I just like the class. Like, I don't know if there's an area that I can say, hey, like, this is my favorite part. Like through and through, Seattle, I think, and John Schneider and Mike McDonald like really nailed this identity and franchise altering, in my opinion, potentially draft class.
Yeah. I think what I like the most, especially, the more I sit with it and kind of wrap my head around it, is just that they went for upside. They took swings. They took big swings. They're trying to hit the ball out of the park instead of hitting for singles. And when they got into trouble and had some of those really poor draft classes between like 2014, 2019. And John Schneider even admits this now, like they were drafting more for floor than ceiling. They were making safe picks, taking guys that they thought could make the roster, but they didn't want to spend draft resources. And again, Schneider freely admits this on guys that weren't going to get to play because of all the elite players that they already had on the roster. And then there were some issues with their process as well, but I like that. And so as a result, whereas kind of the narrative around Seahawk drafts there for years during that time was that they reached a lot, right? They took players that we weren't expecting, or they took players much higher than the consensus. It's the exact opposite now. Like you see them showing up on all these lists now of like best value, like Torrey Horton, right? And Damian Martinez in the 7th. Like everyone wants to talk about what great value those picks were. And even taking some chances, Horton coming off the injury, and Riley Mills, maybe he sort of epitomizes that approach to this draft. We're going to get into how we feel about the defensive line group, right? And there may still be some work to be done there, but he's a guy that they readily admit probably isn't going to be ready by the start of the season. But they just, in the big picture, they like the upside so much, and they feel like that group is okay, and they can afford to wait on him, but they think the payoff is going to be worth the wait. And then obviously the Jalen Milroe pick sort of, epitomizes all of that even more so than the Mills pick, taking a guy that, is a boomer bust potential, may never become a starter in the NFL, but if he does, if they get the most out of that ceiling and that skill set, you've got you have a starting quarterback at pick 92. So I think that's it. I would prefer that approach. Take big swings. If you miss, okay, at least you're trying to go for stars. And that's the thing we're going to talk about a little bit today. That's been a storyline over the last couple of years, is maybe a lack of blue chip players But I think when we show this depth chart and this roster, we're going to see that there's a whole bunch of guys on this roster that might be on the verge of kind of getting into that conversation, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And the other thing for me when I look at this draft class, Dan, is I look at it, it's one of the very few ones I think we can take and look at and go, hey, they got best player available, and they also kind of filled needs at times too. And it wasn't where, like you said in the past, we've seen either they went best player available and this guy has no real shot at potentially getting on the field because it's stacked, or we went, hey, we're stretching for a need here, like an LJ Collier pick, and going, now we're missing out on players that are actually capable of helping this team and adding to what's already a strength. And so that's where I look at this one, and you look at everything from Gray Zabel all the way down to Ricky White. Like, these guys, all this draft class could all be on this roster and they could all make an impact in year 1 or year 2.
Yeah. One of the things we did on the step chart is I highlighted players that are still on their rookie deal, including obviously the new draft picks and even a couple of the UDFAs that seem like they have a good chance to make the roster. And it's pretty striking to see how many young players there are. And I think I wasn't able to confirm this today, but I'd heard maybe on the Athletic podcast, somebody said the Seahawks have more rookie deals on their 90-man roster than any team in the league. Whereas like the other side of that spectrum is Miami Dolphins, where they have like the fewest. And that's why, yeah, you look at their roster and there's all sorts of holes there, even after free agency and the draft. Before we get to that, there's a couple of, it's the off season, right? Topics are a little harder to come by. You see some of the creators like me pull back a little bit. It's not going to happen with me. We'll just keep coming up with stuff to talk about every day. But just league wide, Derek Carr announcing his retirement today, apparently related to a shoulder injury that's going to require significant surgery. It's a 6-month timeline. Not sure why he waited this long. There's a lot of differing opinions on what's behind all that. 11 years in the league. You're the quarterback guy, right? For those of you who don't know, Bryce is an offensive coordinator. He coaches quarterbacks, has a quarterback academy, played quarterback. How would you sum up Derek Carr's career and then just kind of put it in perspective with, your reaction to him calling it quits today?
For me, when I look at Derek Carr, I look at a guy that it was a good NFL starting quarterback. And I think for him, he got a bit derailed. His injury in 2016, we're talking about a guy that literally, at that point, the Raiders at that time were still in Oakland, and they were really flying high that year. And then last week of the season, he breaks his ankle. At the same time, Mariota broke his ankle in literally 2 games of roughly around the same time. And he was basically third in the MVP voting even after breaking his ankle. He was on fire that year. And it kind of threw him, I think, off his path because he came back. They struggled. The Raiders started to struggle. They tried to recapture that and so on and so forth. And then you look at what happened with him and Josh McDaniel. And I think in my opinion, if Derek Carr is still with the Raiders and doesn't get moved or doesn't get released and told, hey, you're out of town, I think he's still playing. And I think the Raiders might have been a better organization in the long run for it because he was a good quarterback. We talked about, us here in Seattle, we had been living in the Geno Smith situation where we're talking about a guy that keeps you in the playoff conversation, but maybe doesn't get you unless there's a certain amount of players around him into winning multiple playoff games. You look at that year that they fired Josh McDaniel Gruden, and all of a sudden the Raiders are in the playoffs against the Bengals, right? And we're talking about a team that's got an interim head coach, and Derek Carr, they were a few plays away from winning that game versus the Bengals in that wild card round. And he statistically was one of the better quarterbacks during his time frame in the NFL for completions and touchdowns and passing yards and all those. But I never thought he got the love he deserved from the NFL as a whole. And then you look now with what's going on in, New Orleans, that team is 5 years overdue for their rebuild. First off, as we know, they've just been kind of tapping that credit card and pushing it down the debt down the line, but
can't help themselves.
They can't. And it's how they function. But when this offseason, when it came out that they asked him to take a restructure, he said, no, I'm not restructuring my deal. And there was a whole bunch of stuff that kind of led up. And then all of a sudden this injury popped up that, he'd injured his hand at the end of the year, not his shoulder. And now the shoulder thing started to happen. And then there was all the reports, from different NFL reporters saying that he had the shoulder injury. He goes out and says, what he said during his sermon at his church. to me, there's a lot of murkiness to this rather than a player was injured and decided to call it a career. It just seems like there's some other things going on. And we talked off air and I said, remember Carson Palmer retired to get out of Cincinnati. He retired, went on retirement, and then the Raiders traded for him and he left. There could be a situation like this where maybe Derek Carr takes a year off and all of a sudden Derek Carr is back next year.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit before we went live, and I think the telling thing there would be, and I haven't read anything about whether he plans to have the surgery or not. Sometimes when these guys really retire and they have a significant surgery like that, they choose to just rehab it if they can live a normal life without it, if they don't have to throw a football 60 yards ever again. So if he were to have the full surgery and start rehabbing it pretty hard, then maybe that would indicate that he might make himself available. I do think he kind of serves as the poster child for the mid quarterback in the NFL. And I don't say that in a demeaning way. I think some fans use the term mid as an insult, but it's that guy it's better than half the guys in the league, sometimes plays at a top 5 or top 10 level, but not all the time. I think you can put him in that bucket with, we've talked about this, like Matt Hasselbeck, Geno Smith, maybe Sam Darnold fits into that category where, opposing fans want to rip your quarterback, say he's not good enough. And even some home fans wish they could do better, but it's hard to do. And, he's had some ups and downs in his career, certainly, but if he never plays again, he's 22nd all time in passing yards in the NFL. Like that's one of those stats you could probably win a lot of money in bar bets, like asking people where he ranks. It's 40 or 50 maybe, but 22nd. And the other thing that I think is interesting, and to tie it all back to the Seahawks here a little bit, is, after a couple of really uneven seasons, like he played some of his best football last year when he was healthy. He played 10 games out of the 17, 2 stretches of 5 games each, 68% completions, 15-5 touchdown to interception ratio. And that was playing for Clint Kubiak, behind an offensive line that was ravaged by injury, with an Alvin Kamara that got off to the great start, but then looked like kind of a diminishing player. They had wide receiver injuries. I think a Seahawk fan should look at that and say, okay, that's pretty promising because, Kubiak was able to coax a lot out of him, especially now knowing that it might not have even been 100% healthy himself. The other thing is the Seahawks announced yesterday that they are doing something, or they're going to attempt to do something about trying to get the home field back in Lumen Field. And some fans just want to say, well, play better, right? I was having that debate with someone today online. It's like, okay, well, they won 28 games the last 3 years. They've played pretty good. But it's the issue of like so many of those tickets are owned by corporations and people who aren't true fans, and they just resell them. And sometimes at a profit, not as much. I know as a season ticket holder for 40 years, you can't make as much of a profit now as you could, certainly 10 years ago. But they're trying to do something about the people that sell them all the time. And so the result is we get, 20,000 Buffalo Bills fans out of the 70,000 that are at the stadium. And the policy is now that they even said, I like the way they word it. They said, you're welcome to resell your tickets through the ticket exchange because it's a guaranteed situation. But if we see it happening too often, then we will review your status and we'll consider taking your tickets away, but they'll give you a chance to respond first and explain yourself. I haven't seen any other teams do this. I've heard of some teams pulling tickets, just flat out pulling them. What do you think about the new policy?
I really like it because you are now putting your one thing, 2 things out of this. You're listening to your fan base, right? Like we talked about it. You did a show. Me and Ryan did a show at the HawkZone Rundown. A lot of Seahawks content creators did it after we were like, hey, that stretch of games, like there's no advantage in Seattle anymore. Like it's not loud. And you were at the game stand and you're going like, there's a lot of wrong colored jerseys here, more so than there's been in the past. And I think what you do with that is you're listening to the fans that we're saying like, this is ridiculous. Like, why are we not the presence that we were known as the 12s? Like we're seeing so many of the other teams' jerseys in our stadium. And it, to me, it shows that the organization listens to their fan base. But at the same time, it's also putting, the corporate side and these resellers on notice being like, hey, look, we're not guaranteeing you we're going to take your tickets away, but we're letting you know we're paying attention and we're going to see what you're doing. And if you do show that you're just reselling them for value and you're not actually being a true Seahawk fan and coming to the games and being supportive, then yeah, then there's probably someone that would love your tickets and would be there all the time. And that's, to me, something that shows that the Seahawks are actually trying to do something differently about it. And yeah, I've heard of organizations pulling tickets and stuff like that, but to say, we'll give you a chance to respond, I think that's an interesting twist on it too, because that's saying, hey, look, we're not trying to, but if it's not up to our standard, then yeah, we will. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's something that needed to be said, needed to be done by the organization, because now it's going to put everyone on notice. And I wonder this year if that changes. Do we see less of the other team's fans in our stadium?
Yeah, and I was, as I said, as a longtime season ticket holder, all the way back to 1984, to date myself, I was relieved the way that they worded that about reviewing it, because when there's times I can't get to every game, and so I want to sell them to friends. But the problem is, no matter how much you think you might trust someone, if you just sell tickets directly to someone, not through the ticket exchange, and they go break policy, they go smoke in their seats or spill a beer on someone or get into a fight, you can get your ticket suspended or yanked for someone else's behavior. If you sell them through the ticket exchange, it's guaranteed. They have to sign, they have to acknowledge, people probably don't read it, but they have to acknowledge that policy. And so you're covered, but there's no guarantee who's buying it at the other end. So, I've been more careful the last couple of years about selling directly to people that I really trust, that I work with, that I consider friends, and that I know are going for the right reasons. But yeah, during that great stretch, 2012 to 2016, winning record every year, 8-0, 7-1, 7-1, 5-3, 7-1. And then things really kind of fell apart. 2020, the year without fans, they were 7-1, and then 3-5, 5-4, 5-3, and 3-6 last year. So hopefully this can just at least move them closer to where it feels more like a consistent home field advantage. And then you combine that with them playing defense again, which it certainly looks like they are going to do. And then those two things usually is really a perfect recipe, because the fans understand that's when to be loud. Guys get a little bit of a quicker get off. So yeah, I'm happy about it. I like it. We'll see how it works out. All right. Shall we get into this roster?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do this. Let's put it up here. There we go. So what I did here, this isn't all 90 players, right? There's some players that just are going to have no shot at the roster. And so inevitably, of course, because I said that, someone I didn't list here is going to make the team. Mm-hmm. But it's roughly 80 players. And what I did is, you see, obviously broken out by position groups, and then by each position up here where you see that number in parentheses, I do this every year. I go back and I look at, usually it's Michael Sean Dugar or the Seattle Times, and they do the initial opening day, the 53-man roster breakdown. And this is how many players at each position they usually keep. It fluctuates sometimes, right? Like defensive tackle, defensive end, there's a total of 7. Sometimes it might be a little bit weighted one way or the other. Same with the offensive line, if guys can play different positions. So I did that. And then what the yellow indicates, as I said at the top, is those are guys on rookie contracts. And some of them, like I don't know what happened with Riley Mills there. I don't have him in yellow, maybe because of the injury, or I just messed it up. But just gives you an idea. There's 40 names there in yellow. You can just really, really see how young the team is. And even some of the guys not on rookie deals, guys like Josh Jobe, young, Josh Jones, young, right? Sam Darnold, Drew Lock for quarterbacks, young. As you look at this today, what is the strongest position group on the team?
Oh, that's a good one. I would probably say the running back room, I think, is your strongest group.
Yeah.
To be honest, like that's the one that stands out the most to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, some of that is projection, right? Do you include Damian Martinez in that? Like if you were doing a projection today, George Halani or Damian Martinez?
Oh, Damian Martinez, and it's not even close.
Yeah. Yeah. I like Halani. It's just, he had the injury history. And I just think Martinez in most years is a 4th round pick.
That's the grade I had on him, was a 4th round grade.
Yeah. He's a guy that I've liked. I think we talked about Damian Martinez during the college football season.
Yep.
You know, I mean, obviously seeing him play in the old Pac-12 for Oregon State, and he really helped turn that program around. I think there's an opportunity for a year from now, we might be saying that about the wide receiver group. Like, there's a lot of projection involved there, and there's a lot of ifs, right? But when you talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba, Cooper Kupp, who looks, you know, if you've seen the videos and the pictures of him working out, he certainly doesn't look like a guy who's hindered in any way by that ankle injury or anything he's dealt with in the past couple of years. Like, he looks ready to roll. You know, even the veteran presence of MVS, who just fills a specific role there. And then the more I look at this draft, I cannot believe that we got Torrey Horton in the 5th and we got Ricky White in the 7th. When we did mocks on the channel, we had fans in the comments calling for Ricky White on day 2.
Mm-hmm.
When Keith Myers and I were live streaming the 3rd round and we were getting close to 92, we were talking about the potential of Milroe. But over the course of the hour leading up to that pick, we mentioned Torrey Horton's name like 10 times. Like, we just thought that was a natural place to pick him. I think if he's not coming off an injury, that he's a 3rd rounder at worst.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened with Ricky White. Maybe it's just level of competition or whatever. But I think the Seahawks very well may have grabbed 2 receivers in the same draft that are going to be on this roster for a very long time.
So for me with the receivers, I had Torrey Horton as a 2nd round pick if he's healthy. That's where I had him, is going. Like, I had Jaden Higgins, I had Jalen Noel, and then right after there roughly was where I had Torrey Horton, because I was like, you know, you watch his tape, he can run all the routes, he's big, he's fast, he can block, he can do all the things you want. And then when you look at Ricky White, I had a 4th round grade on Ricky White. I thought, hey, this is another guy that's got some size. He'll block, he can add special teams value to you. So yeah, you take him, but he's an early day 3 guy. He may even sneak into the 3rd round, but I never thought I'd see Ricky White being the last pick the Seahawks take in the 7th round of the NFL draft. And I'm going, okay, like, I know people said this wasn't the greatest receiving draft for greatest draft for receivers, but that is still insane value for guys. And personally, in my opinion, I think Torrey Horton puts MVS's job in a little bit of a bind for camp and really has to prove it. And I really think Ricky White is going to take Derek Young's job from him, because he contributes on specials. He can add in the punt and kick return game. And I think he's a better receiver, hands down, than Derek Young is.
Young's just a mystery to me. You know, we saw some flashes as a rookie, and I'll never forget how near the end of his rookie year, Shane Waldron started getting really creative with him. Remember that? He was putting him in the backfield kind of as a fullback and motioning him out, and he made some catches, and he's big and he's physical and all of that. He just he didn't take a step at all last year, you know, and I just thought that was odd. And I think if it comes down to it, I think that's a guy on the outside looking in. He would have to have a phenomenal training camp to have a shot to make this roster. Now, again, this is based on sort of traditional roster numbers. I've got running back listed at 4, which would make a lot of sense because Clint Kubiak does like to go with 2 backs, more so than any coordinator we've had in quite a while. But sometimes, like when that 4th guy, there was some thought it might be a fullback. So it's almost like we have to create a position now. I have some concern that they're only going to keep 3 running backs and a fullback, and that might expose somebody like a Kenny McIntosh to waivers, which wouldn't really thrill me. Same with the tight end position. They usually only keep 3, but with as much 12 and 13 personnel as Clint Kubiak likes to run, doesn't it seem like it would make sense for them to keep 4?
So it's actually funny. I had my live show earlier today with Clinton Bonner from the Seahawks podcast, and we actually talked about
Clint.
We basically talked about tight end and running back. And the thing for me is we discussed the potential of one of the top 2 backs being potentially traded, Charbonnet or Ken Walker, because Martinez, to me, I look at him as an upgrade over Zach Charbonnet. And people may think I'm crazy. I think he's a better running back, pure running back. I think he's got more of an attitude that fits more of what Mike McDonald may want out of his running back with the attitude. And I look at Brady Russell and Robbie Oots as 2 guys that can play tight end in a pinch. can play fullback for you. I think Robbie Utes has basically got to be horrible not to get that job. I think there's a reason they took him in the 5th round, is he really is someone I think Clint Kubiak and them kind of pounded the table for to get. I don't think Noah Fant is on this roster. And even I think he could be a June 1st cut kind of guy. And then you take 3 tight ends, and then you take the fullback as your H-back / tight end in Robbie Utes, because you've seen he can play tight end and do those things. You go with AJ Barner, Arroyo, and Saubert, who I think is going to be one of their undervalued signings. I think it's going to pose some value. And then I think you're going with Kenny, K9, Martinez. And the thing for me with McIntosh is he's a little bit different than everybody, because he can do a little bit of what K9 likes. He can be a bit of that slasher speed guy, which we saw last year, and he can give you a bit of the power. And those are 2 things I think that are relatively nice to have. If you lose either a K9 to an injury or Charbonnet or Martinez, you're not completely losing that aspect of your offense, where if you get rid of McIntosh and say you do keep Martinez, Charbonnet, and Walker goes down, great, we've got 2 power backs. We don't have a speed back now in our offense. We don't have somebody that has that little bit of that extra gear, where if you move off and say you trade a Zach Charbonnet and get something for it, and you have Walker, Martinez, and McIntosh, and Martinez goes down, well, we can still do some of our power stuff with Kenny Mack, or Walker goes down, and it's like, hey, we can still do some of our speed outside zone stuff with McIntosh. We're not losing as much value.
Yeah.
So I think there's a chance that one of the running backs, the upper echelon running backs, is not going to be on the 53-man roster come September.
It's an interesting idea, because, and I pushed back on anyone who bought into any of the buzz about trading a running back leading up to the draft, specifically Ken Walker. And for a couple of reasons. One is because every single time that rumor was put out there, it was from a non-legitimate Twitter account. That there was no legitimate sourcing. The Seahawks were not shopping Ken Walker. Maybe teams were calling, but that's just due diligence. Teams call each other all the time. That was never going to happen. Not with a really strong, really deep running back class, when teams can just go get a guy that they like in the draft, right? But it's a different story when you get into July. And as much as that position can be so volatile, and durability is such an issue, if a certain team loses their guy, and the Seahawks get to camp and they realize these guys can all play, right? Then maybe a Zach Charbonnet becomes available, or a Ken Walker for the right price, even though he's in the last year of his deal. If they get in there and they see, okay, we got some cat situation here. Then it might make sense. And Noah Fant's the same way, right? They get into camp and they really like Eric Saubert's a scheme fit. And he worked with Kubiak in San Francisco for a year. Arroyo stays healthy and he's as dynamic as they expect. And then, as you said, both Utes and Russell can do tight end things. They can play tight end. And so maybe that does open the door for Brady. Russell's healthy and they like both those guys. Maybe they do move another tight end off the roster, get something in return for him, or just release him. And then you've got that hybrid guy that can fill both those roster spots, right? So I don't think anything is outside or is off limits now, because we've seen that this organization, the way it's run now with John Schneider and Mike McDonald teaming up, like, they take hard swings, as I said before. And they make decisive moves. We saw it with the inside linebackers last year, and they're not going to shy away at all from moving off a guy that they've publicly proclaimed that they like, and that has had a big role in the team in the past, if they think it makes the team better today and moving forward.
Well, and here's the other thing with that, with Walker and Charbonnet, and the reason I bring it up is K9 is due his contract extension this coming off season. Charbonnet is due at the next one. Like, next year is Zach Charbonnet's contract year, and this year is K9's. You are not going to lock up a bunch of money in your running back room in that regard, especially when you took, like, if they had taken more of a flyer on a guy instead of Martinez, like a guy that even projects to be more of a, hey, he offers a little bit of this and we're trying to take a swing. You went out and got a very well-established back that a lot of people had graded higher than where he went. And that's not just me or you. That's actual, like, national, like, Daniel Jeremiah and those guys all talk about, I've heard him on 710 basically saying like he expects Martinez to take enough reps away if there's an injury or something like that from a McIntosh or a Charbonnet to be a factor in this running back room. And that's where I think people have to realize, like, I get the love for K9, I get the love for Charbonnet, but there's a reason Seattle did take that level of a running back. They took a guy that has produced everywhere he has gone. And to me, when I watch Martinez, Dan, and I see him run, I can see the appeal. He reminds me of Chris Carson, the guy that you took that he sets a tone and he has an attitude about him that the running back room in Seattle, in my opinion, doesn't have and hasn't had since Carson and beast mode were in it, which is, doesn't matter if you're in the hole, I'm going to run through you, not around you. I'm going to run through you and set the tone that way.
Yeah. And I'm a sucker for running backs that have, legitimate jump cut in their arsenal. And he's so good at that,
He's so good.
Putting both feet down. You don't know which way he's going. He's really instinctive for a guy his size. He's one of those running backs that I still, even when he was playing heavier, when he was closer to 230, 235, just never looked that big because he just moves so naturally. And even at the Senior Bowl, and I know he cut some weight before he went down there. I think it was closer to 225, but he looked like a 210-pound back, because of the way he moves. But I think you're right. Other than, if Ken Walker goes out and has an 1,800-yard season, right, has a Saquon Barkley type season, which in a Clint Kubiak offense could happen, right? He could have a Clinton Portis type season, like, Portis did for Shanahan and in Denver. Or was that for his dad? Was that for Gary Kubiak or was that for Shanahan? Then probably they're going to figure out a way to sign him and keep him around. But if he's banged up again, or if the other guys, look just as good, or maybe even look like they're a better fit, or Walker just can't rewire himself to where he's more north and south, more one cut, more decisive, stops trying to bounce everything outside, then it just makes no sense to give him big money in the offseason when you have those other guys waiting in the wings with a couple of years of control left. I mean, it's the real advantage of being stocked at a certain position and being able to work from ahead. It gives you the luxury of being able to add an elite talent there when you can, or adding value, but you don't have to force anything. And we'll talk about some positions in a minute that maybe they're still going to be looking to have to force some things and be pretty aggressive next offseason. Now let's talk about the offensive line group, because this is going to get really interesting. When you look at those numbers, right? They usually keep 4 offensive tackles, 3 guards, 2 centers. So let's just call it 9. And they've drafted more offensive linemen than any team in the league the last 3 years. That's a real stat. Look it up. Confirm it. Ask Alexa. And so the narrative that, they don't do enough is certainly out the window, and especially now that they've spent the 18th pick on a guard. Some of these names are not going to be on the roster anymore. Like, that's going to be a massive competition in camp for these guys trying to get those 9 spots.
No, it really is. And if we just look at tackle to start with, I think so. I listened to Corbin Smith's recent interview with the coach of, I think it's the Iowa offensive line, who coached Mason Richmond. And I think that guy's making this roster. He just, to me, screams, if he's your swing tackle, he's your ideal swing tackle. Like, he is analytical. He's, going to get out, and Iowa produces good offensive linemen. They just do. It's something they're known for. So when I look at Josh Jones, and I even look at Mike Jarrell, I think there's a chance they try and sneak Jarrell onto the practice squad this year, because I just, now that you have a guy, I think, in my opinion, in Richmond, that's probably more developed and can give you a little bit more. One thing with Mike Jarrell is he struggled in run blocking last year. Like, you could see he couldn't fire out and drive. And in this particular scheme, when you're running wide zone, a lot of this is getting off the ball and getting upfield and getting in your hands into guys and moving them. So I think your 4 tackles, in my opinion, are going to be Cross, Lucas, Richmond, and I think it'll be Josh Jones that they'll keep, because I think Jones will again give you that NFL experience just in case. Those are the guys I see being your 4 tackles. I think there's a good chance Mike Jarrell and Amari Knight are not on the active 53 roster.
Yeah, the thing about Jarrell, and I certainly liked his upside when they drafted him, really athletic, even though he came from such a small level of competition. I just don't think he can play the left side. I think he's a right tackle only. And that really limits him, especially when you look at the other guys. Josh Jones was brought in specifically because he can play both sides and some guard in a pinch. But he's on a very low guaranteed deal. Like if these other guys look great, they want to protect him and they're afraid they might lose one of these young guys if they try to pass him through to the practice squad, then, they could certainly move on from Jones. I agree with you on Richmond. And the thing I really like about him, and for those who don't know or didn't see the Corbin piece, only one other tackle has ever started for 4 years at left tackle for the Iowa Hawkeyes, which are one of the most, continuous, long-standing, Kirk Ferentz. He's been there for 100 years, right? Like they've just done things the same way for a long time. Only one other guy has started at left tackle for 4 years, and that was Tristan Wirfs. Pretty good, and he's pretty rich, right? And so Richmond's a guy that even though he played the left side the whole time, usually guys that can play the left side can play the right side, not so much the other way. There's an athletic component there. And I do think that Jarrell probably has a better chance to get through to the practice squad. Yeah, so I think you might be right there. And this is all assuming, of course, that Abe Lucas comes to camp 100% healthy. It sure looks like he's having a healthy offseason, and that's great. And then we'll talk, at another date many, many times later on during the season about his contract status and potential future. And then we're going to talk about guard, because guard has been the focus of the narrative all offseason. They finally took one in the first round, first time since Steve Hutchinson. Hutchinson helped make this happen. He's wearing Hutchinson's number. As much as I thought I liked Gray Zabel before, the more I hear from him and watch him and listen to him, the more I like him. He's the left guard, no matter what. And then right guard's going to be a battle between Christian Haynes, Satawa Lemea, Anthony Bradford, Bryce Cabledew. And I'm not so sure, I've been pounding the table for Haynes, ever since last year. Don't think he was coached right last year. Don't think he really was committed to. Thought he played well when he got a chance, and they didn't for whatever reason. We've seen the pictures of him working out this offseason. Somebody posted a picture yesterday with the caption that it looks like he's kind of lost some of that bad weight, kind of muscled up a little bit. He seems like the guy, but I'm not so sure they don't just love Bryce Cabledew as well. I think he's going to get every shot to compete for this job as well.
So Bryce Cabledew is my offensive version of Kobe Bryant. And you know how much I love, and I've loved Kobe Bryant since his draft.
Yeah.
Bryce Cabledew is that for me on the offensive line. When they took Gray Zabel, don't get me wrong, I was ecstatic. That was great. That was, we were on the show together when that happened. We were all so happy that happened. When I saw on day 3 that we got Bryce Cabledew, I was ecstatic. I was in the car driving. I couldn't have been happier. I think really, if you look at that guard group, I think Haynes still makes this roster, because
I still think he starts. I do.
I think he starts. I think it's going to be him and Zabel that are going to be our 2 starters. I think Cabledew is the one that's going to push Lemea and Bradford. And again, I think Bradford could be a trade piece. You could potentially get him and move him for a late round pick or something like that and get something back for him. Now, the interesting thing about Lemea is he's also been working a lot with Abe Lucas. And in the offseason, watching them work and talking to people I know that are connected, there's some belief that he may get a shot back at right tackle in this new scheme, because it suits his skill set for what he is as a right tackle better than the gap power scheme that Seattle ran last year. And I would be interested to see what they do with Lemea if they don't bump him back out to right tackle, or however they want to do it. I think it's really going to come down to Cabledew and Lemea for that guard spot. And I think, honestly, Bryce Cabledew is the better athlete than Lemea, and it's not even close.
No, he has like a 9.8 RAS or something like that. Like one of the most athletic guards in this entire draft class with the explosive testing. I can't wait to see that battle. That's going to be interesting. Lemea may have a little bit of an advantage over somebody like a Bradford. First of all, I think he's a little bit better.
He's better athlete.
But he's played the left side as well. He did last year in the preseason. We've never seen Bradford try to play the left side, even though he did play left tackle at LSU. And I think you're right. I think there'd be some value, as much as we talk about the dearth of talent at guard in the NFL, that, as much as fans want to say that Bradford's garbage, he is an elite level athlete at his size. And there's if there's a team out there that runs primarily more gap power, like there could be some value there. They could get a 5th round pick. I mean, they spent a 4th on him. Maybe you get a 5 or a 6, or it's conditional or whatever. I think this is the kind of roster, and we haven't even got to the defense yet, similar to 12 and 13 and even 14, where, and I'm not saying in, the top end talent there, not yet anyway, but to where so many of their players at the cut down to 53 would get picked up by other teams and claimed and make rosters right away. I think we're going to see more of that this year. And so there might be opportunities, especially with just the one cut now, to get some picks, because I don't think they're going to get any comp picks again for 26 heading into 27, because I think they're going to be pretty active in free agency next year with the cap space that they might potentially have. So I've kind of just forgotten about the comp pick idea, but maybe you can add a couple of late, day 3 picks with some of this excess.
It's actually funny you said that, Dan, because I discussed that on a show a few weeks ago after the draft, where I said this team might have enough guys where we're talking about, like when we had Howard here in 2012 and we cut him and he ended up going and being a huge factor for the Kansas City D-line for years. And just some of the guys that they did lose in that 2012 to 2014 era there, where they were cutting guys that were going on and being starters other places, like Ron Parker at safety and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I agree. I think Bradford very much could go. Like, I'm not saying this because Pete's there, but he fits what the Raiders do in their scheme and what, Chip Kelly wants to do there and what they've got with their running game. Like, you may be able to swing Bradford over there and be like, hey, do you want a 5th or 6th round to get him now, rather than hoping you get him through the waiver period when that big cut happens?
Or just watch him go to Philadelphia.
Oh yeah. Don't do that. Don't
play his right guard between, that's becoming all pro. And then the center position, which, man, I'm telling you, I have been team Sundell since the day. Since the day we both laid eyes on him at the mock game last year. But then the more I've watched a lot of tape lately, I'm going to do an episode on this in the next week or so. That Olu Oluwatimi, I think, is a pretty damn good player. Mm-hmm. And I think I said when he was drafted, I thought he could be one of those guys that starts for 10 years in the league and never makes a Pro Bowl. Just, a guy that you can just plug in and be dependable. But Sundell has that athletic upside. And now, it's just hard not to imagine him playing side by side with his best friend and college teammate, Gray Zabel. In some ways, that has to give him an edge, right? Like, you're a football coach. Like, there's a continuity and a chemistry thing there that can't be denied, right?
I agree. I think because you have nothing really concrete in that inside 3 spot, like nothing's there. Like, you think of Olu kind of got given the job because Connor Williams retired. It wasn't, they legitimately went out and got Connor Williams because they didn't trust Olu to run the scheme that they had. Like, they didn't at the end of training camp. That's why they went out and got Connor Williams. And the thing I can't get out of my head, Dan, and I've tried to be objective about this, is when Jalen Sundell pulled in that Green Bay Packers game when he went in.
The Charbonnet touchdown?
And led Charbonnet down the field. And I went, okay, it doesn't matter if it's gap. It doesn't matter if it's zone. That's what your center needs to be able to do.
Yeah.
Jalen Sundell, to me, he gives me a bigger physical version mindset of Jeff Saturday. Remember Jeff Saturday for the Colts?
Oh, yeah.
That is who Jalen Sundell reminds me of. Just what if he had been physically the right size to play center and not what he was. I think there is a good shot we go into camp and it is a straight back and forth competition. And I wouldn't be surprised if that first day Jalen Sundell isn't taking first team reps. The reason I say that is something John Schneider said in one of his press conferences. And he said they were talking, somehow Sundell came up again. And Mike's brought Sundell up a numerous amount of times this offseason. Like, not even really like someone asking about Jalen Sundell. It's just, we're talking about the offensive line. Sundell's name comes out.
Yeah. Combine. He brought him up, said he can play 5 positions.
Yeah. He can play 5 positions. He's, but we really like him at center and, he's going to be really good there and whatnot. And then John Schneider said, Jalen Sundell is tough, reliable, and smart.
Yeah.
And those 3 words are the same 3 words Clint Kubiak used to describe what he wants in his center. He has to be tough, smart, and reliable. Doesn't matter which way you put the 3 words. That is what he said. And as soon as I heard John Schneider say that after Clint had said that in his opening press conference, I went, okay, there's something John Benton and Rick Dennison and Clint Kubiak have seen in Jalen Sundell that they really, really, really like.
And if he does win the job, like I know some of the fan reaction will be like, oh, that was he's a bust. It was a waste of a 5th round pick. It's no, it's not. It's just, it's a guy, sort of exerting himself, right, and just winning the job. But Olu Oluwatimi, you could make the case, if that happens, could be the most valuable backup center in the league. Like, to know that you have a guy there as your backup, not like when we had Joey Hunt that we had to turn to in times, when we lost our starter and things like that, but just, a guy that could step in and play, give you starter level quality reps. And the fact that they started to cross train him late last year at guard, he could be that Evan Brown kind of super sub if that happens. But I still wouldn't count him out. I think he's going to get every shot to win that job.
I agree as well, but here's a name I'm going to throw at you, see if I give you some PTSD. Isn't it much better to go in going, hey, we might have 2 capable centers than, hey, cool, we're starting Drew Nowak at center?
Yeah. And talking about like, well, shoot, we're going to lose some guys, right?
Yeah.
Where some of these guys aren't going to be on the team, guys that we had high hopes for or whatever. Yeah, I think they absolutely handled the position the right way this offseason. They took the big swing on the one guy in free agency they thought was worth paying big money to, and they didn't get him. They gave him a hell of a shot, and then they just didn't go throw money at someone just to throw money at someone to appease the fans or to just take shots. That kind of, I feel like that's what they would have done 5 years ago. Well, let's just sign Tevin Jenkins in and call it good, right?
Yep.
They had this plan, and now we know, looking back, we know that ZELLE was their guy the whole offseason. The whole offseason. Today, again, or maybe it was 2 days ago, Michael Sean Dugar from The Athletic wrote a really in-depth piece, kind of going back to his hometown and everything and studying his whole journey. And it's like they had him in their crosshairs before they got to the Senior Bowl. And then it was at the Senior Bowl when they went, okay, yeah, this is really our guy. So they knew that. And so they weren't just going to add bodies just to add bodies, because they have all these other guys that we're looking at too.
The other thing I'm going to say on this number total that you've got there, Dan, at all the positions, there's one that is definitely going to change, and that's quarterback. They are carrying 3 quarterbacks this
absolutely
year.
Yeah, which will be cool. I mean,
Yep.
First time we've seen in a long time. Some fans have said, well, what if Milroe looks really good? Maybe they trade Drew Lock. No, they're keeping 3.
Drew Lock was signed, in my opinion, and from what I've kind of heard through the grapevine of people I know that are connected, they knew that there was a chance they could get a quarterback like a Milroe potentially in the 3rd. There was a good chance of it. They were getting this set up to actually develop a quarterback and go through what John grew up with Wolf, and develop. Like, they have no intention, unless Jalen Milroe somehow shows up in the next 6 weeks and all of his mechanical stuff's fixed and his progressions are on point. Jalen Milroe's really going to redshirt this year, minus some package work they may put in there. They want to develop him right because they are extremely high on him. And that's one thing I've heard a lot, is that John really does view him as a potential franchise quarterback.
I want to address this because I've heard this a lot, and I've been guilty of saying it too, in regards to Bradford than Oluwatimi. But when we talk about Sundell versus Oluwatimi, that is the advantage that Sundell has, is just that quick twitch athletic ability to get to the second level. And so people just assume that Olu isn't a scheme fit because he just doesn't move as naturally. I think sometimes, I think we've gone a little too far this offseason in talking about scheme fit with the wide zone scheme. And what gets lost in the conversation is pass protection. Everyone wants to talk about running the wide zone and being able to get out and pull and get to the second level, which Olu can do. Watch the tape. He just doesn't look as fluid as a guy like Sundell because he's squattier, right? He's just a thicker, lower set, center of gravity. But he is an elite pass protector.
Yes.
Right? It's the reason that he won the Remington Award and the Outland Award at Michigan. He didn't give up a single sack. I don't even think he gave up a pressure. He may have given up a pressure or two, but he didn't give up a single sack that year at Michigan, playing in the Big Ten, right? You have to protect the quarterback too. And that's been a bigger issue here for a longer time than the lack of run game. And what do we hear the most about Sam Darnold? It's the same thing we heard about Geno Smith. For him to be the most effective, he has to be upright. And I think as much as we all want to talk about scheme fit and the wide zone, I think the 5 guys that can keep Darnold upright the most are probably going to get the first crack to play week 1.
No, and I agree. And that's the one thing with Olu too, is Olu's issue was never pass pro, it was run blocking. And it was his ability to reach the second level in some of those things just based on his speed and his ability to move. Now, what I'll say, though, is in comparison to Bradford, I think Olu moves better in the zone than Bradford does. And that's not saying a lot, but it's saying enough. And I think also with your center, like Olu's extremely smart as a center. That's the other thing that's huge about Olu is Olu gets what he's looking at when he sees the front. And the more he played last year, the more you started to see that come through.
Yeah.
That's where I think, again, like I said, it's going to be a battle in camp that's going to go right down to the wire on who's going to be the center.
It's an interesting comment from OFG, dude. 5th round is a depth pick or developmental player. You can't just make a blanket statement like that.
So should Richard Sherman not have been, or Cam Chancellor should have been a developmental and depth pick? I'm just curious there. Like,
although I'll say this, you could have made the argument when he was drafted that Sherman was a developmental guy because he was a converted wide receiver
for one season barely, and same with Cam. Like, if I'm talking developmental, I'm thinking more than one season. I'm thinking 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah.
And that's for me where when people make blatant statements like that, it shows me you're not doing your amount of in-depth knowledge that you should have and study of what's going on, because there are so many players that are 5th round guys that are there because of injury or because of their scheme fit they had in college. And all of a sudden they show up on an NFL field and it's a totally different thing.
Well, and it varies so much year to year. There's some years that heck yes, there's nothing but scraps left in the 5th round. And you're
100%.
just trying to take shots on guys with traits. But this year was not that case.
No.
Like, do we feel like Torrey Horton is a developmental player? Right. And, or just a depth pick? Do we feel like Riley Mills is? I just don't buy that. I think every single, does Damian Martinez in the 7th, is he a developmental player? I don't think so.
Is Ricky White a developmental player?
Right. All right. Let's talk about this defense. Let's see. I thought there were some comments here about the defense that I didn't want to miss here. Well, let's do some of this before we move over to the defense. I want to catch up on some of these.
Okay.
C Squawker says, even if Cooper Kupp misses some time, feel really good about Horton. Think he could step in and start a few games. Seattle would be fine. I think MVS is kind of the perfect sort of placeholder and mentor to a guy like Torrey Horton there at that position. And then Bob Parmenter follows up with Horton and White the next Baldwin and Curse. How crazy would that be? I mean, you talk about a couple of guys, those guys were both undrafted, but still the same idea that, 2 day 3 picks. I've had some people say to me that, like, wow, White's just a special teams player. Watch the tape. He's not.
Nope.
He needs a little work on his route running, but so do 90% of college wide receivers, especially the ones coming out of like air raid spread type offenses, right? They don't have to run a full route tree.
The worst thing for me, and this is the one thing I want to see college football change, is I want to see college football change the hash marks. That's where you get the discrepancy in the route running, because the hashes are so much bigger in college.
Yeah.
It allows you to spread the field and allows these guys to run more to space, which is fine. But when you get to the NFL and it gets condensed, you need to be a better route runner. And this offense in particular is built on timing. The pass concepts are built on timing.
Smigel says Sherm had to wait a bit, same as Cam. Cam didn't start until his 2nd year, but Sherman had to wait, 7 weeks?
7 weeks till Trufant got hurt, or Josh Wilson got hurt, and then he was.
And then, man, that was so much fun.
Well, and you even think with Cam didn't really have to wait, because Cam ended up starting to play in sub packages.
Yeah, and he was a special teams demon.
And then the next year he was right in there and going, because that was the thing with that Seattle team at that particular time is, yes, we were trying to develop 5th round guys and take swings, but these guys had to play. Like Sherm, even Cam's, you think about when Cam was a developmental player and not playing as much, is when he picked up and dropped the Cleveland Brown running back, because he finally got to start.
Right. Yeah. Sherm was like 4th on the depth chart coming out of that camp. All right, let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Already Schmeigel saying nose tackle. I did a whole episode on this yesterday, and trying to make the case really with some historical data and then kind of comparing it to what McDonald had in Baltimore. And some people are really still stressed about the nose tackle position. And if there is one thing that I'm still even a little uneasy about, or I was certainly disappointed coming out of the draft, was in what was a very, very good interior defensive tackle draft. I think Daniel Jeremiah said he had 24 starter grades in this draft, which is twice as many as an average year. They didn't take one of these guys. They took Mills, but he's an inside-out guy. He's going to play more edge, but he can get on all fours, but he's not a nose tackle. Are you concerned about the nose tackle position?
Not as much as some people. And the reason I say that is you look at what everyone thought Mike Macdonald was going to do, and something that still sticks in my head from Mike Macdonald's opening press conference was, I'm not building the Baltimore Ravens defense here. I'm taking, there may be things that we do that may be similar, but we have to play to what we have here and what we're going to do here. And so when I look at, everyone talks about Michael Pierce because that's what he had in Baltimore. Michael Pierce was this big, hunking, nose tackle. And then I look at, the rest of the defense, the way that it's starting to be constructed. He didn't really have a Byron Murphy in Baltimore. Someone that can be stout, someone that's that explosive as a smaller defensive lineman. And so when I look at this and I look at how Mike Macdonald has used his, the scheme and the multiple fronts he likes to run, the Riley Mills pick makes more sense. Now, I do think with Hankins now being back in the fold that they just signed, I think there's a chance that you'll see them do what they did last year. I don't think we're ever going to see the big hulking nose tackle in Mike Macdonald's defense unless that guy can play more than just that spot.
Well, and even if we do, right? And I went back and looked at the Pierce thing because that's what a lot of people say. When, anytime over the last 13 months that this issue has come up, someone will say to me, well, he had Pierce in Baltimore. Because I'll say, he doesn't really need a guy. You need players that can do nose tackle things from time to time, but you don't need that big, Haloti Nada guy in the middle all the time, right? It's a specialized role. It's early downs. It's rundowns only. And then what I usually get back is, well, he had Michael Pierce, 345 pounds right there in the middle in Baltimore, right? So I went back and looked at that 2023 Ravens team, right? And first of all, let's start with the Seahawks. Last year, when you look at the snap counts, and you ask the question, how often do they really use a true nose tackle? Jarran Reed, his snap percentage at the nose tackle spot last year, 2.6% of his snaps came playing nose tackle. And I put NT here at this position group because that's how the Seahawks list these guys. Surprisingly, they have Jonathan Hankins listed as a defensive tackle. And I don't have him on the list. I missed that. I don't know why. Hankins isn't on there. I must have copy and pasted something wrong. But they have Hankins on the official Seahawks roster listed as a defensive tackle, not a nose tackle. I found that interesting. They have Jarran Reed listed as a nose tackle. He played 2.6% of his snaps last year at nose tackle. Hankins played 31% of his snaps. So less than a third of the time that he was on the field, he was actually playing zero technique over the center, like even inside shade, right? And then fans are like, we got to get Byron Murphy out of the nose tackle spot. He played too much nose tackle. 14% of his snaps played nose tackle. Michael Pierce, what do you think the percentage was of snaps in 2023 under Mike Macdonald for the Baltimore Ravens at 345 pounds that he actually played nose tackle?
I'm going to say 30%.
21%.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go.
Snaps. And that's just, you look at PFF, it's not just nose tackle, zero technique. It's left side shade, right side shade too. Lump all that together. He only played nose tackle 21% of the time. And they do have guys like Quentin Bohanna, who played for Aden Dirty his first 2 years in the league and had about a 20% snap share there. Do I wish they had another guy? Yeah, I think they're fine now. If somebody goes down, if Hankins at 33 years of age or 34, I think he is now, gets nicked up, he gets hurt, I think they're going to be looking to acquire someone at the latest at the cut to 53. That's where I get nervous. If they had to play a game today, I think they're fine. But I do think that's maybe the only position where I think they might be hunting pretty hard if there's some vet cuts, or if a certain player that fits that profile that they like gets cut, maybe after June 1st, that they might jump on.
No, I agree. I think they're going to add to that spot. I think they're going to add a veteran in there that's going to, because I don't think like Bubba Thomas, I don't think is going to make the team at the end. I think there's a lot of guys that won't. I think they're going to be searching for that vet pickup. Or Schneider's going to do what he does sometimes at the end of the preseason is make that trade so the guy doesn't end up going to waivers that they like.
Just getting back to the offensive side, always good to see John McGrath in here. He says they need another center for depth, in my opinion. They only carry two. They've never carried 3 centers, at least in the last 10 years or so, on their opening 53-man roster. So,
and they do have a third option in emergency. His name is Gray Zabel.
yeah, he can play center. Even Christian Haynes played some center at the Senior Bowl. I don't know if he's played any. I don't know if he's taken any reps. There was a lot of buzz for Thor Griffith. He was a mini camp invite. He wasn't a signed UDFA, 6'2", 320 pounds out of Louisville. He's pretty famous online for bench pressing 500 pounds. He had some productivity at Louisville. Talked to Corbin Smith about this the other day. He said he just doesn't look like a guy that can hold up in the NFL. There's a reason he hasn't been signed by anybody yet. He's at the New York Giants mini camp this weekend on a tryout basis. Like, when all 32 teams continue to pass on a guy over and over again and won't even give him an undrafted free agent contract, probably says something about their projections. Yeah. Let's talk about outside linebackers. This has been the source of quite a bit of discussion. Nwosu Hall, Mafe, and then DeMarcus Lawrence, who's listed here. The Seahawks kind of do this, another position where they do this at, where DeMarcus Lawrence, those guys are listed as defensive ends, which kind of doesn't really exist in this defense sometimes, as does Leonard Williams, who also we could say he'll play some zero technique too. Sometimes he'll line up over the center himself in certain packages. But Nwosu, Hall, Mafe, Williams, and Lawrence, I would kind of count as your edge players. Williams can play anything. He can be listed in any of these columns here. And then Jared Ivey, the guy that surprisingly kind of slipped through the draft without being drafted. You feel good about the edge position?
The edge position right now, I feel good with. I think Ivy, I listened to your and Corbin's show, and Corbin made the comment, I believe, about his conditioning and maybe the way he's currently built Ivy. I think that's going to get rectified because I think he's got a lot of things you're going to want to play at that position. I think Mike Morris is the biggest bubble guy here out of the group.
Yeah.
He has to do something because once Mills is healthy, I think Mills fits Morris's role better than Morris does. He's got to show something. He barely showed last year. The year before that, he was injured, and we all thought, hey, Mike McDonald's here. He knows how to use him. Well, I don't know what happened there because he didn't get used that much.
Yeah, sometimes, a lot of times you see those young players in their second year, take a step forward. And he just didn't. Like, he just never cracked the rotation. I'm trying to remember now. I could look it up, but if he was a healthy scratch that often, was he active on game day? Like, he just, I think he played on teams. I think he was in on kick block and things like that just because of his length. But he was a guy that I loved. He was one of my day 3 crushes coming out of Michigan. Just loved the motor, and the length and everything. He just kind of played with his hair on fire. I think if we did a show where we talked about like guys that could kind of step in out of the shadows and make a huge impact on this roster, he's one that could. Like, if he did take a step forward in his third year and become a legit part of that rotation, 6'6", 290, can play inside and out. Like, it might come down to he versus Jared Ivey for that 5th kind of edge / defensive end spot.
No, I think it will. And, Connor O'Toole's still someone to keep an eye on. Like, I'm not counting him out. I think there's a good chance that 5 group of outside linebackers all make this roster.
And I think, I'm going to do, we'll have a discussion here in the next couple of weeks about like potential breakout players. And we mentioned at the top that one of the criticisms or narratives about this roster the last couple of years is a lot of nice young talent, but where are the blue chip players, right? Who are the stars? And I think there's quite a few that could step out this year and become that. We'll talk about a few of them in the secondary for sure, but I think Derek Hall is one of them. His game, once I got to know it as a rookie, and he showed flashes rookie year. He was battling that shoulder the whole time. There's some reps last year. He had 9.5 sacks in his second year, 9.5, 7.5. Am I getting that wrong? Where he just, it powers his game. If he can add a couple of pass rush moves, it's all the better. But he destroyed some really good tackles last year. There was the one against the Detroit Lions where he went against Taylor Decker. and beat him with a single arm power move and one-handed sacked Jared Goff. I think Derek Hall could establish himself by the end of the season as the best edge on this team, even above Oye Mafe, who's in a contract here.
I agree. And the thing for me that jumped off the page or jumped off the tape with Hall last year wasn't the power, it was the speed. His get off surprised me because the one thing we heard was, oh yeah, he's got decent speed, but he's more of a power type rusher. To watch him bend the edge on some of those rushes really did surprise me.
Let's go back to the offense. This is an interesting one that I'm honestly surprised, and I try not to like jump on people too hard. I like the engagement, always love the comments, but we're just going to be honest. I'm surprised that this sentiment is still out there. Mm-hmm. I'm stunned they didn't do much to add a starter in free agency for the O-line. They did. They offered more money to Will Fries than they've ever paid an offensive lineman before in their history, and they missed on him. And then who else was there? Who else? Drew Dahlman wasn't coming here.
Nope. He
was a Chicago Bear from the moment that that Ben Johnson got that job, right? Who else was there that would be a guaranteed starter that was worth paying money to, that would automatically beat out any of the other guys on this team? They looked at all of them. They kicked the tires on all of them. They brought in Tevin Jenkins, and they brought in
now they brought in a bunch of guys, Dan.
Yeah.
There was a lot of guys they brought in, and here's the thing:
all of them, all the guys that fans wanted them to look at, they visited with and they looked at, and they felt like they weren't better or couldn't be better than what they had.
And they had a plan to go get Gray Zabel. Like, so here's my question to a lot of these fans is, would you take Gray Zabel or would you take Tevin Jenkins? In my case, I'm taking Gray Zabel because we're talking about a guy that's got injury problems. We're talking a guy that Cleveland took because no other team really wanted to touch him. Pretty indicting that right there.
Ricky still isn't wrapping his head around it. Why did the players not want to come here? Well, because the Minnesota Vikings gave Will Fries 2 more years and 30 more guaranteed dollars coming off a really serious leg injury and waived the physical. The Seahawks weren't willing to do that. I admire that principle. And guess what? They also knew at that time, hey, we're going to take a shot at Fries, but if we don't get him, Zabel's our guy. They wanted him the whole offseason. He'll play guard. If they had signed Will Fries, I suspect we'd be talking about Gray Zabel as a center at this point. I just don't get this. I just think they handled the position perfectly this offseason. There's nobody else that was out there. There's nobody that didn't want to come here. Tevin Jenkins signed for backup money in Cleveland. He wasn't wanted anywhere else. He's not gonna be a starter there. The other guy was Patrick from New Orleans. He's a backup. He's a career backup. The other NDSU kid, I'm blanking on his name, that they brought in. He's not a good player, right? Like, they kicked the tires on everyone you'd want them to. There was nobody that they tried to get that said, no, I don't want to play in Seattle. The Vikings just came in and blew Will Fries away with 2 extra years. They were working on, we had our sources. I did a show on it. You did a show on it. I had direct sources. You had them. They thought they had a deal done, and Fries came back to them and said, can you match what the Vikings are going to do? And they didn't want to go 5 years, $88 million.
And it was, can you do what the Vikings are going to do, and I don't have to fly out for a physical?
Yeah. And Dahlman didn't pick the Bears. Dahlman wasn't going anywhere except Chicago. Seattle never made an offer.
Yeah. No one else did either in the NFL. He went there because that's where he wanted to go.
And also, is Drew Dahlman an all-pro? Is he the greatest? Like, he's a scheme fit. I get it. But he was undersized coming out of Stanford. There's a reason he went on day 3 coming out of Stanford. There weren't like a bunch of teams clamoring for him. Like, he was a Bear no matter what. I just don't, I don't know, man. I guess sometimes you just can't get over a narrative. But
here's my question though. And Dogzilla's even chiming in here too in the chat, is what vet is going to come in here and help if he's not going to beat out who you have as rookies or guys that you're bringing in? So what's the point?
Here's what I'll say on this to tie it up, because I'm tired of talking about the offensive line. When you sign veterans just to sign a veteran because, hey, we need a guy to come in and start at one spot, a guy that's been in the league, you know what you end up with? You end up with Luke fucking Jokel.
Yep.
Okay.
Or Jamarcus Webb.
I am 100% convinced that this offensive line is going to be so dramatically improved by the end of this season that it's not going to be a narrative anymore.
Agreed.
I mean, next season we might be talking about, is Lucas re-signed? Do they draft a right tackle? Whatever. Anyway, let's get back to the defense. I want to talk about this defensive tackle thing a little bit more because I think that's the one position now on this roster that they're not ahead on. And what I mean by that is for years, we've been behind on offensive line. We just can't catch up. So we have 3 or 4 really weak spots. And even if you bring in a guy or you draft a guy and he's good, and it's just not enough, right? Well, now we're kind of ahead. We have all these guys and they're going to have to cut some of them or trade some of them. We were severely that way on the defensive line about 5 years ago when they traded Frank Clark.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to pay him $20 million a year. They still had Jaron Reed, but they were really weak elsewhere. They had to take the shot on Jadeveon Clowney. They had to take the shot on Sheldon Richardson, right? Am I getting that name right?
Yes.
Yeah. They had to take the shot on Carlos Dunlap at the deadline. Like they drafted Alden Robinson the same year they drafted Darrell Taylor. Like they kept trying and they just didn't work out, right? LJ Collier didn't work out. So they're always playing catch up. I think every other position you can say now, especially when you look at the yellow, you look at these rookie contracts, guys that are ascending players, growing players, right? Look how quickly they turned around that inside linebacker group. I think defensive line is still that one that they're kind of, I still feel like they're a player or two short. And I say that only because I want to say this. I think that might be a draft priority next year. I think we might be talking about defensive tackle as the first round priority. Defensive tackle or right tackle could very well, depending on what they do with Lucas, be the position we're talking about next year.
Yeah, I honestly look and you talk about the youngness of the offense and all the guys in yellow that are there, Dan. I think next year might be more of a balanced draft, but I think there may be more of a focus on the defensive line and adding to the edge group even, because I don't know if Chen is on this roster next year. I don't know if Boye Mafe is on this roster next year. It'll be very interesting to see how they're going to have to do some, investment in that front seven. The other area too, and I know we're going to get to it here right now, is inside linebacker. Like they're going to have to start investing in getting some guys in that, because that's an area for me that I am quite concerned with, is the inside linebacker depth.
So I was as surprised as anyone. Talked to Corbin about it the other day that Jackson Woodard was cut so quickly, right? Yeah. He was one of their preferred free agents. They gave him over $200,000 guaranteed. He was a Mountain West Player of the Year, highly productive player. It just, from what Corbin said and from what I've read other places, it just sounds like it was evident once they got him on the field that his body and his athleticism just weren't NFL caliber. Right?
That's what I'm thinking. And when it comes to inside linebacker, like how we used to trust Pete when it came to defensive backs, inside linebacker and off the ball linebacker, I trust what Mike McDonald decides to do. He moved off of 2 starters last year in Dodson and Baker and put in Ernest Jones, or traded for Ernest Jones and put in Tyrese Knight. And we saw the immediate impact of that. Jamie Sheriff, I don't understand the move because it's really odd for a guy that's never played off ball to go from edge to an off ball linebacker. That's a big change.
Yeah, it's usually the other way.
Exactly. It's usually like, hey, you're good enough to come off the edge. We're going to move you in there. But I don't know. It's interesting. Like, obviously they brought in Jackson, I believe, from Kentucky. I think he's got a good chance at making the roster, maybe off of as one of these depth guys. Because I don't know if Patrick O'Connell, and I know you and me both love Drake Thomas, but Drake Thomas to me is like, hey, a guy got hurt and you need to finish out a game, can come in and play. I don't know if we lost Knight or Jones for multiple weeks if I feel comfortable with Drake Thomas making a bunch of starts.
Yeah, and then they signed the guy De'Aaron Jackson yesterday out of Kentucky. He's a guy that I looked at in the draft. I was kind of surprised he went undrafted. 4-year starter. I think he's another one of those guys that had like 50 games under his belt at Kentucky. Surprisingly, at his size played more Will than Mike, but I think that's where the need on the roster is, a guy that can rotate in. And Mike McDonald likes to play 3 linebackers at times, and that third guy needs to be able to cover. And even at 6'1", 240, and there's plenty of reps on tape where Jackson plays to that size, where he looks like a thumper and can come up and kind of, work through traffic and hit guys. He's a pretty good cover guy too. I think he just immediately takes the place of that undrafted guy that could have a shot to make the roster, where we thought it was Woodard to begin with.
Yeah, no. And that's where with Jackson, I think it'll be interesting to see how he fits in. Cause I really look at that inside. I think there's going to be a lot of change in that inside linebacker group on this depth chart outside of Tyrese Knight and Ernest Jones.
Yeah. Yeah. And even though, at least we're talking about depth.
Yeah.
Whereas last year at this time, we were talking about like, can Baker and Dodson play? Like, what are we doing here? And
we were banking on Dodson's PFF scores. Remember, Dan, of how good he had done in Buffalo?
Yep. And then corner. And this one, again, it'll remain to be seen this year how these guys are deployed. Because if, for example, if Nick Emenwari or even DeAnthony Bell, who played this role in Cleveland and was a signing that I thought was sneaky good even before they drafted Emenwari, if those guys can kind of hold down sort of that box nickel big slot sort of position, that frees up Devin Witherspoon to play. I do think we're going to see his snaps on the outside go up this year. And now you're talking about Reek Woolen, Devin Witherspoon. And for all the talk this offseason about Reek Woolen should be traded, it just was never entertained by the Seahawks. And I go back to a year ago when Leslie Frazier was on the Move the Sticks podcast with Bucky Brooks and DJ. And he said, we think this guy's ceiling is so high that he could travel with number one receivers. And we hope to get that out of him. So I think they certainly have a lot of faith in him and conviction, and they're committed to him. And hopefully that'll pay off. Because if he takes a step forward this year and Witherspoon can play more on the outside, I think we're all going to feel pretty good about that cornerback position. But how do you feel about the depth?
I am a little concerned with the depth because I look at Josh Jobe and we're banking on him doing what he did again as the third. I know they've talked about Shaquille Griffin potentially coming back into the fold of things. I think that'd be a good guy to see if he can still produce as a third corner in this group. Nehemiah Pritchett, what we saw, we didn't really see a lot of that was good. Jean Charles is going to be interesting. I think he's a guy to keep an eye on. And I also think Waxter's another guy to keep an eye on. Alexander and Waxter are almost the same player. I just think Waxter might be a better fit. I look at Reek Woolen and go, I think what Seattle did is said, okay, prove to us that you're going to be worth the money that all these other corners are making currently on the market this year. And if you're not, then we're okay with a comp pick for you that'll be as high as a third rounder. Yeah,
I think so. And again, you talk about a balanced draft next year. I think I said this right after the draft in my reaction that I think maybe I was foreshadowing today. When you look at this roster in its totality and the young talent and how evenly it's spread throughout the roster, that next year could be the first draft in quite some time where there's always preferences, there's always needs, and it might be defensive tackle, it might be corner, it might be right tackle, but it won't be as glaring as it was this year where they had to get a starting left guard. And that just frees you up to just let the draft come to you and maneuver around whatever and take the best guys. But I do think that corner could very well be in the crosshairs next year, especially depending on how they feel about potentially extending Reek Woolen. And then you get to safety. And I think there's the cool thing about the Emenwari selection is where we got him, because I didn't like the idea of him at 18 because I just don't feel like he's a complete safety yet. I don't like the positional value of taking a safety at 18 anyway, unless he's a do-it-all safety. He's not, at least not yet at this point of his career. But we talked about Cam Chancellor earlier in this show, and I don't mean in style of play. I think it's unfair to compare Emenwari to Cam Chancellor. But Cam Chancellor, as we said, hardly played any snaps on defense as a rookie, except in, sub packages. He was mostly a special teams guy, and then he got his opportunity year two, and the rest is history. Emenwari, while he's developing, as Cam needed to as a coverage safety, because he played in the box at Virginia mostly, will be able to contribute as an almost starter in that box role. And so I think that alone gives you a ton of value. We're not talking about like, well, can this guy even get snaps? Right?
Yeah. When I look at Emenwari, Dan, I think this is they've got their Swiss Army knife now. They've got a guy that can take away some of the, constant bashing that Witherspoon got physically from offensive line when he had to come in and blitz off the edge. Like, Witherspoon's not a big nickel at any point in his, he's maybe 200 pounds, if that. Nick Emenwari being 220 and 6'2", 6'3", he is going to be able to hold an edge if he needs to on a pulling tight end or a pulling guard and be able to be impactful in those ways and cover those guys. It's just a better matchup and a better scheme matchup. For me, when I look at that safety group, I already know who I would preferably take as the 4 safeties. I know they have 5 listed there, but I think you might get 4 because I think they might take another corner out of that group, or somewhere else they might add a player in that count. It's Julian Love, it's Kobe Bryant, it's Jarek Reed, and Nick Emenwari. And I'm really interested to see what Jarek Reed does because he's the forgotten man out of this group.
Yep. Really liked what we saw from him before the knee injury.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he's a really interesting guy here because he's a little bit different than all of them in a way. He's so much faster than, Kobe Bryant and Julian Love, but he's built like a smaller safety.
And then the only other question to me about the safety position is, when does Kobe Bryant get extended?
Hopefully soon.
I actually expected this one to happen by training camp. I don't think it's going to be a huge contract. I think it's, they're going to be able to get him at a pretty reasonable number.
Yeah.
But they'll still make a commitment to him. I think it'll be a win-win for the player and the team. But man, he's completely transformed his profile, moving to safety. And then you want to talk about the specialists, right? I think Michael Dixon will be here until he's 40 years old. But we did have this comment a little while ago when we talk about a balanced draft in 2026. This could happen.
I mentioned it on my show earlier today that I think that I think there's conversation that, that you need to start looking at that because of the money that you do have in the kicker department that's allocated there. Because I think Jason Meyer's next contract will, if he stays in Seattle, will make him probably the highest paid kicker in the NFL.
Yeah. Now that Justin Tucker has been blackballed, probably won't be in the league. That could very well be if he has another good year. Especially given that, he's kind of alternated. He's like that relief pitcher, that kind of has a good, his even numbered years are good and his odd numbered years, he's a little bit off. So if he puts another year this year, like he did last year, he'll certainly be in a position to command some good money. I just think it's been a long time since I've been able to look at a Seahawks roster and just like so much of it. It's not perfect.
No.
But in the salary cap era, you can't find a perfect roster. You can't. You show me the Philadelphia Eagles. They got some issues right now. They lost some dudes on defense that they have to replace. And they, they drafted some guys but you don't know. And sometimes those guys take a while to develop. It's, Kansas City Chiefs certainly don't have a perfect roster. There's issues on every roster. Rams fans are freaking out about their secondary. The 49er fans are still upset that they haven't really addressed the offensive line. There's issues in every fan base with every organization where teams are players, fans, are freaked out. But I feel really, really good. Now it's a blank slate, right? And because of all the changes on offense this offseason, there's still a lot of unknowns. And maybe you could make the argument. In fact, I won't say that as a statement. I'll ask it to you as a question. Do you kind of feel like this is year 2 of a soft rebuild?
Yes. It's funny for me. Year 1 of it was resetting the defense.
Yeah.
We accomplished that.
Check.
Year 2 now is resetting the offense and getting the offense in here that they want, that they need to function, that's going to make things a more complementary and complete football team. I expect 2026 to really be the year this team pushes for something.
Yeah, and I think it could be one of those years too where they could be really aggressive in free agency if they feel like there's that one player to put them over the top. Maybe that's a defensive tackle. Maybe it's an edge player. You look at the edge group. I was just looking at that today. I think I have it right here. Free agents set to be edge players. I know we're talking about defensive tackles, but just pass rushers. Mafe is going to be a free agent, right? TJ Watt, Micah Parsons, Trey Hendrickson, Khalil Mack, Nick Bonito, Mafe, Adafe Owe, Malcolm Kuntz, Kwity Paye. That's a stacked group, right? But also, and I mentioned this in my nose tackle show, if they're going into next offseason, they need to sign a veteran nose tackle. Let me make sure I get these names right. I know one of them. I just want to make sure I get the other one right. Hold on a second. Let's go back here to my nose tackle. If you're going into free agency next year and you feel like you need one guy to just fill that spot, Travis Jones and Michael Pierce, Baltimore, both free agents next offseason. So there you go. You can fix it after all that. Yeah. And now the only question is which guys take a step forward and become stars. And I think that's going to be one of the real, I think there's two major storylines this year heading into the season for me. One is just the development of the offense. So many changes there, coaching staff, coordinator, quarterback, receiver, like just about everything. It's been almost a complete overhaul. And then the other thing is going to be, oh my gosh, I'm having a brain cramp. What the other one would be? Just which guys develop as stars and step up and become like, take that next step, become legit blue chip players. I think that's a huge part of what we're going to be looking for this year. No,
and I agree. I think you're going to be looking to see which guys that were drafted even last year take a jump. Does Byron Murphy take a jump? Tyrese Knight, does Kobe Bryant continue his level of play? And then it's also to see which guys from this year's draft class are able to make an impact. Can Arroyo be a factor more than we initially think? What is Gray Zabel? And again, Gray Zabel to me doesn't need to be an all-pro or Pro Bowl player this year to be an upgrade. He needs to be a good guard. Be a good entry-level NFL guard, a good plug-and-play guy, and we'll be fine. And, the other thing for me that I'm going to be really interested in, especially in the early part of this year in the preseason, is what does Jalen Milroe look like? That's going to be a huge thing for me in seeing his development between this year. But then it's going to be for me taking, because my biggest thing with Milroe, as much as, and I'm going to do a whole episode on it with Ryan, is his issue is not a throwing of the football issue. As much as people, when they hear these, other people talk about mechanics, it is his inconsistency of tying his feet to his eyes when he sees something. That's what gets him into trouble, where he's throwing the ball behind on an out, or he's behind on an in, or those things. It's not that he's not processing the game well, or that he's got some weird throwing mechanic in his delivery. Yeah. It's because he's moving his eyes and his feet aren't necessarily coming right away, or vice versa. His feet go first before his eyes get there. And that is something that can be fixed, and it can be fixed within a year to 2 years.
I do want to touch on this. It's come up, the issue of, hey, with all these young guys on the roster, some of them are due for extensions, and that causes some concern sometimes among the fan base. I will just say this: there is nothing to be worried about. For the first time in maybe 10 years, the Seahawks are in such a great cap situation where we're not looking ahead to next year, projecting that they're already tied up against the cap. They have something like 86-90 million available in 2026. They still, as we sit here today, have 26-27 million, I think. And so that's why I think you'll see some extensions this year, Kobe Bryant being one that makes a lot of sense, because then you can take some of that hit this year. And then it's all about structure and the way the Seahawks do their deals. It's a low year one cap hit. There's very little guaranteed money beyond the second year. And so you can really kind of stack those and stagger them. They have all the money in the world to extend all the good young players that they want to keep and be active in free agency. They're as well positioned as any of the good teams are in football right now as we sit here today. And then I'll finish on this. The one guy that I think we didn't talk about enough when you talk about stepping forward as stars, and maybe it's just because he's so good, we're already taking him for granted. I think Jackson Smith and Jigba may very well be a NFL superstar by the end of 2025. I could see a 120 catch Michael Thomas type season out of him.
Did you see the recent photo of him at minicamp where he looks like he's actually put on some size now?
Yeah, he muscled up and cut his hair, man. He's going to be faster.
And remember the last time we saw a player do that in Seattle where they cut their dreads off and they got a little bit bigger was Earl Thomas.
Yep. Yeah.
All of a sudden, Earl Thomas became an all-pro level safety after that occurred.
He did indeed. All right, man. This is fun. Hey, guys, some great comments, great questions. This was a really fun exercise. Way too soon. I know some people are doing it, but I think it's way too early for me to try to do a roster projection. I think until we at least get to mandatory minicamp with the full squad, start to see where some of these guys are playing, where some of the reps are doled out and that kind of thing. It's just because there's so many young players. That offensive line is a perfect example. Like trying to project who the backups are going to be is really, really going to be difficult this year. But I think that's a good problem to have. I think it kind of indicates where this team is. Like there's, for the most part, they're okay at every position. And if you do still worry about defensive tackle, they have the means to go get a guy if they need to. Like if they have an injury or they just don't think they have enough there, they have cap space. They have their full assortment of picks next year. They have some players that they can deal with from depth. Like if they get to camp, first of all, two things. If they get to camp and they realize Mike McDonald and John Schneider and Adam Dirty, and they all look at each other and go, man, we need another dude in the middle. They'll do what they did last year. They'll go out and get a Roy Robertson Harris, or they'll go out and get a Leonard Williams like they did 2 years ago. Like it might not be at the beginning of the season. It might be at camp, right? They'll go out and be aggressive and fix that. I have absolutely no doubt that they'll do that because we've seen them do it already at a couple of key positions.
And the thing that's nice about the way they do it now, Dan, is they actually go get a guy that's going to impact rather than what they've done in the past when Pete was here, where they'd go take a swing on a guy with some upside that maybe is sitting. Like they went out and got a starter in Ernest Jones last year. So maybe that's what they end up doing this time.
Indeed. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in. At Seahawks Forever on Twitter and Blue Sky. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell. That way you'll be notified anytime there's new content. If you want to support me as a full-time content creator and support the channel, you can do that down below in the description. All the links are there. Bryce, what do you got coming up on the HawkZone Rundown?
We've got our Pulse of the Hawks show that's usually on Monday. Will be on Wednesday as we will be doing the schedule reveal with Mookie Alexander. We got that coming up, and we're going to have some other cool guests over the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to dive into a little bit of history on the Seattle Seahawks and dive into some of the stuff that, you know, we can pull from with the past teams and see if there's any correlation with this team going forward.
Love how the NFL spreads these things out to make it a 365-day-a-year season. The schedule reveal on Wednesday. There's going to be leaks beforehand, but once it's all out, then we can actually start to take a tangible look at the season. Then we can do our predictions and that kind of thing and start to, last year I didn't do a prediction because there were so many unknowns. I didn't know what kind of team we were going to have. I think I'll take a shot at it this year when the schedule comes out and try to predict how many games they're going to win. Anyway, that's Bryce. I'm Dan. Thanks again for listening and watching. Appreciate it. All of you, forever and always. Go Hawks. We'll see you next time.
Go Hawks.